Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming back. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. So YouTube will keep showing you stories like this. Now, let's begin. My name's Peter Doyle. I'm 55, retired from the police force about 3 years back after my knee gave out. Nothing glamorous, just couldn't chase suspects anymore. These days I work overnights as a security guard for the county, which mostly means sitting in a climate-controlled room watching 16 monitors cycle through the town's surveillance feeds. It's boring work, which is exactly what I wanted. I'd had enough excitement for one lifetime. The feed I'm talking about covers the town square. You know the kind. Brick pavers, a fountain in the middle that hasn't worked in a decade, benches around the perimeter. During the day, it's full of people. At 4 in the morning, it's a ghost town, or it should be. I first noticed it maybe 6 weeks ago. I wasn't paying close attention. I was doing a crossword on my phone, glancing up at the monitors every minute or so like you're supposed to. When I looked up, there was someone standing in the square, dead center, right where the fountain sits, just standing there perfectly still. At first I figured it was a drunk, or maybe someone having a mental health crisis. I watched for a few minutes, waiting to see if they'd move or fall over or do something that required me to call it in. They didn't. They just stood there, arms at their sides, facing roughly east. After about 5 minutes, I checked the timestamp later. It was almost exactly 5 minutes. They turned and walked out of frame. Normal walking pace. Nothing weird about it except the standing part. I noted it in the log and forgot about it. The next night, same thing. 4 in the morning on the dot, someone walks into frame, stops at the fountain, stands there for 5 minutes, leaves. Different person this time. I could tell from the clothes, the build. This one was shorter, wearing what looked like a bathrobe. That's when I started paying attention. Third night, another person. Taller, wearing jeans and a hoodie. Same exact spot, same duration. I went back through the previous week's footage during my break. Every single night, 4 in the morning, someone different. Always the center of the square, always motionless, always 5 minutes. I started keeping a separate log, not the official one. I didn't know how to explain this without sounding crazy. Just notes on my phone. Height, clothing, any identifying details I could make out. The camera's pretty good, but at night and from that angle, faces are tough. Still, I could tell they were all different people. Different ages, different builds. Men and women both. Here's what got under my skin. None of them ever looked up at the camera. Not once. You'd think if someone knew there was a camera there, and everyone in town knows about the cameras, they were a whole thing when the council voted to install them, you'd think they'd glance at it, even unconsciously. These people never did. They walked in, staring straight ahead, stood facing the same direction every time, and walked out without ever turning their heads. I started coming in early to watch it live. 45 minutes before my shift, I'd be in that room, watching the empty square, waiting. It became something I couldn't stop doing. The timestamp would roll over to 3:59 and my throat would get tight. At exactly 4 in the morning, someone would enter the frame. I tried everything I could think of to rationalize it. Secret society thing, maybe. Some kind of ritual or protest that I wasn't aware of. But there was no symbol, no gesture, nothing that looked ceremonial. They just stood there. And the randomness bothered me. Different people every night, no pattern I could see in age or gender or anything else. I thought about going down there myself one night, confronting whoever showed up, asking them what the hell they were doing. But something stopped me. I think part of me didn't want to know. Part of me wanted it to stay on the other side of that screen. Then I recognized someone. It was a Tuesday, about 3 weeks into my private documentation project. The person who walked into frame was wearing a blue winter coat I'd seen 1,000 times. I knew that walk, the way she hunched her shoulders slightly against the cold. Even before she reached the fountain, and I got a better angle on her face, I knew. It was Sarah Kemper. She worked at the coffee shop on Main Street. I've known her since she was in high school. She served me coffee every morning for 5 years before I switched to nights. I watched her stand there for 5 minutes completely still, then turn and walk away. My hands were shaking so bad I had to put down my pen. Sarah wasn't some stranger I could keep at a distance. She was a real person I'd had conversations with. She knew my usual order. She'd asked about my daughter's college plans. The next morning, I went to the coffee shop. Sarah was there, same as always, smiling and making small talk with customers. I ordered my coffee and tried to sound casual when I said, "You get any sleep last night?" She laughed. "Not enough. Never enough." "Why?" I couldn't do it. I couldn't ask her. The words physically wouldn't come out of my mouth. I started recognizing more of them after that. The guy who bags groceries at the store. A woman I'd gone to church with before I stopped going. Marcus Chen, who'd been a rookie when I was still on the force. All different nights, all standing in the exact same spot for exactly 5 minutes. I pulled Marcus aside one day, tried to work up to it. We talked about the old days, about the department. Then I said, as casually as I could manage, "You ever go walking late at night? Can't sleep, that kind of thing?" He gave me an odd look. Just for a second, something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or caution. Then he smiled. "Nah, man, I'm out cold by 10. "Why?" The look, though, that half second before he recovered. He knew I was asking something specific. That's when I understood. They all knew. Every single person who'd stood in that square knew exactly what they were doing, and they knew they weren't supposed to talk about it. I went through my recordings again, made a master list. 43 different people in 6 weeks. I started cross-referencing with the town's population. We've got maybe 8,000 people here. I did the math. If it was a different person every night, and if everyone was expected to do it, every adult in this town. Which meant eventually, inevitably, it would be someone closer to me. My neighbor, my daughter, my ex-wife, or me. I started dreading not just 4 a.m, but every night. Watching the feed became torture, but I couldn't stop. I needed to see who it would be. I needed to know if my theory was right. Last week, my daughter walked into frame. Jessica, 23 years old. She's in grad school 2 hours away, but she comes home once a month to do laundry and raid my fridge. She must have been visiting. I didn't even know she was in town. I watched her walk to the fountain. I watched her stand there, wearing the jacket I'd bought her for Christmas, her hair pulled back in the same ponytail she'd worn since middle school. I watched her stand perfectly still for 5 minutes. Then I watched her leave. I called her the next day. She sounded tired but normal. We talked about her classes, her roommate drama, whether she'd be home for Thanksgiving. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to ask her what the hell she'd been doing in the square, why nobody talks about it, what happens if you don't do it. Instead, I said, "Love you, kiddo. Drive safe." The thing is, I've started having this feeling. It's hard to describe, like a pressure building behind my eyes or an itch I can't scratch. It's worse at night. Worse as it gets closer to 4 a.m. I think I'm getting close to my turn. I don't know what happens if I don't show up. I don't know if it's voluntary or if something compels you, pulls you out of bed and down to the square. I don't know if everyone does it once or if it cycles or what the rules are. Nobody talks about it, nobody acknowledges it, but everyone does it. Last night, I almost called the state police. Almost reported the whole thing to someone outside the town, But when I picked up the phone, that pressure got so intense I thought my skull would crack. My hand cramped around the phone. I couldn't dial. So I'm stuck here, working my shift, watching the feed, waiting to see whose turn it is tonight. Waiting for the night when the pressure gets too strong and I feel my legs carrying me out the door, down the street, toward the square. I keep wondering what I'll see while I'm standing there, staring east, unable to move. I keep wondering what's looking back. I'm going to tell you what happened at Professor Harwell's cabin last December, and I need you to understand. I'm a pretty rational person. I'm a biology major. I deal in facts. Harwell asked me to house-sit his place over Christmas break because the pipes might freeze and he needed someone to keep the heat running. It was 3 hours north, deep in logging country, but he was paying me $200 for basically just existing in his cabin for a week. I said yes before he finished the sentence. The cabin was exactly what you'd expect. Small, wooden, that permanent smell of old coffee and firewood. 1 bedroom, a kitchen that was really just a corner with appliances, a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. Harwell had left me instructions on the counter. Simple stuff. Keep the thermostat at 65. Don't let the fire go out completely. There was a list of emergency numbers, though my phone had no service up there. What he didn't mention, what wasn't in any of his instructions, was why every single window in that cabin had been covered from the outside. I noticed it maybe 20 minutes after I arrived, after I'd brought my stuff in and started looking around properly. The light inside was dim even though it was only 3 in the afternoon. When I went to open the curtains in the living room, I realized there was something behind the glass. Black paper. Construction paper maybe, or something heavier. It was taped to the exterior of the window, covering it completely. At first I figured it was some kind of insulation thing. Harwell was cheap about heating costs. He'd mentioned that. But when I checked the bedroom window, same thing. Bathroom window above the toilet, same thing. The small window over the kitchen sink, every single one, covered completely, taped down tight from the outside. I went out front to look. The paper was industrial, thick black material, and whoever had put it up had done it carefully. The tape was that heavy contractor stuff, wrapped around all 4 edges. I couldn't see through it at all, just solid black pressed against the glass. Here's the thing, I almost left it alone. I almost just shrugged it off as weird professor behavior and spent the week inside with the lights on. But the cabin felt wrong with all that darkness pressed up against the windows, like being in a box. So on the second day, I peeled back the paper from the living room window. I used a kitchen knife to work under the tape. It took me 10 minutes to get 1 corner free, then I just pulled. The paper came away in 1 sheet, still intact, and I stood there holding it while I looked out the window. There was nothing there. Not nothing like trees and snow and the normal view you'd expect. Nothing like absolute darkness pressed directly against the glass. No depth to it. No variation. Just black, like the window was still covered. Except now from the inside I could see the glass was clear. I put my face close to it, tapped the glass. It was definitely a window, definitely transparent. But outside, immediately outside, was just this complete absence of anything. I couldn't tell if it was night. My phone said 1:47 in the afternoon. Or if something was covering the window from out there, or what. The darkness didn't move, didn't shift. It was just there, absolute and featureless, like the window opened onto nowhere. I covered it back up, taped the paper down again from inside, hands shaking enough that I had to redo 1 corner twice. That night I didn't sleep well, kept thinking about that darkness, kept trying to logic through what I'd seen. Maybe it was weather. Maybe some kind of storm had rolled in, thick enough to block all light. But there was no wind, no sound of precipitation. and the darkness hadn't looked like storm clouds. It had looked like nothing. By the third day, I'd convinced myself I'd imagined how complete it was. Darkness is just darkness, right? Light was probably just low. Maybe the cabin was in a valley or something, surrounded by trees that blocked the sun. I decided to check again. This time, I tried the kitchen window. Same process, worked the tape free, pulled the paper away. Same result. That immediate, total darkness pressed right up against the glass. I turned on the kitchen light, thinking maybe I'd see some reflection, some indication of what was out there. Nothing. The light from inside just stopped at the glass. Didn't illuminate anything beyond it. I left that one uncovered. Stood there for probably 20 minutes just staring at it, trying to make my eyes adjust, trying to see any variation at all. The darkness didn't change. My reflection was barely visible in the glass, just a faint ghost of myself standing in the lit kitchen, and beyond that, nothing. Look, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just leave? I thought about it. But my car was out front, and that meant walking through that darkness to get to it. And something about that idea made my chest tight. Plus I kept telling myself this had to have an explanation. Professor Harwell was a geologist, a scientist. He wouldn't have a cabin in some impossible place. This was just something I didn't understand yet. The bedroom window was smaller, up high on the wall. I saved it for last because I'd have to stand on the bed to reach it, and some part of me really didn't want to uncover that one. But on the fourth night, I don't know why I did this at night, that was stupid. I climbed up there with my knife and started working at the tape. The paper peeled away easier this time, like the tape had dried out or something. I pulled it down in one quick motion and looked out. Same darkness. Same complete absence of anything. But this time I noticed something I hadn't before. I put my hand against the glass and felt how cold it was. Not winter cold. Colder than that. The kind of cold that makes your skin stick slightly, like touching metal in a freezer. And then I saw it. Faint, almost invisible. Another edge of tape, just barely visible against the darkness, running along the interior frame of the window. There was another layer of paper, taped from the inside. I stood there on that bed for I don't know how long, staring at that tape, understanding slowly what it meant. Someone had covered these windows twice. Once from outside, which I'd assumed was Harwell being weird about insulation or privacy or whatever. But then again from inside, which meant someone had been in this cabin, in this darkness, and had decided they needed to cover the windows from both sides. I didn't take that inner layer down. I climbed off the bed carefully, like any sudden movement might make something notice me, and I went to sit in the living room with every light on. The heat kept running. The fire kept burning. I stayed there until morning, which I only knew had come because my phone said so. The windows, the ones I'd uncovered, showed the same darkness they'd shown at midnight, at 3 in the morning, at 7 in the morning. No change. No dawn. Professor Harwell came back 2 days early. I heard his car pull up, heard his key in the lock, and when he walked in, I was still sitting in that living room, all the lights on. The windows I'd uncovered still showing nothing but black. He looked at me, then at the windows, and his face did something I can't quite describe. Not surprise, something worse, like resignation. "You uncovered them," he said. I couldn't make my voice work right. "What's out there?" He didn't answer. Just went to the kitchen, got the roll of tape from the drawer, he knew exactly where it was, and started recovering the windows with the paper I'd left folded on the couch. His hands were steady, like he'd done this before, like he'd done this many times. He paid me the full $200, told me I could go. I drove 3 hours back to campus, and I haven't talked to him since. He's still teaching. I see him sometimes in the hallway of the science building. We don't make eye contact. I keep thinking about that inner layer of tape, about what it means that someone was inside that cabin in that impossible darkness and decided they needed to seal themselves in even further. About whether Harwell put that paper up himself, or if it was someone before him, someone who stayed there longer than they should have. My hands are shaking again just telling you this. I still don't know what I saw. I still don't know what that darkness was, or if it was anything at all. But I know Harwell knew, and I know he sent me there anyway. I moved out of his class, changed my schedule. I don't want to know why. I work pest control for a living. Been doing it 5 years now, residential mostly, sometimes commercial. Rats, roaches, the occasional wasp nest. Nothing I haven't seen before. At least that's what I thought until I got the call about the Millbrook Historical Society. It's this tiny museum on the edge of town, one of those places with maybe 3 rooms of old photographs and farm equipment that nobody visits except school groups twice a year. The woman on the phone, Mrs. Donovan, sounded embarrassed. Said they had an infestation but couldn't figure out what kind. No droppings, no sounds in the walls, just... And this is where her voice got quieter. Paper everywhere. I figured mice were shredding insulation or something. Happens more than you'd think. When I pulled up that Tuesday morning, the building looked normal. Red brick, small parking lot, Historical Society sign out front with half the letters faded. Mrs. Donovan met me at the door, mid-60s, cardigan and reading glasses on a chain. She looked like she hadn't slept. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said, and immediately started leading me inside. "It's gotten worse since yesterday. I don't understand it." The first room was the main gallery. Display cases, framed photos of the town in the 1800s, a few mannequins in period dress, and paper. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of tiny scrolls, each about the size of my thumb, scattered across every surface. They covered the floor in drifts, piled in corners, filled the display cases like someone had dumped them there. I picked one up. It was rolled tight, bound with what looked like spit or mucus, already dry. I unrolled it carefully. Inside, in tiny, precise handwriting, the mechanism requires adjustment before the birds return to their morning positions. "What the hell is this?" I said. Mrs. Donovan's hands were shaking. "They're all like that. Every single one. We've read dozens. They're all different sentences, all grammatically correct, but none of them mean anything." I unrolled another. Granite surfaces reflect the intentions of the Underground Committee. Another. 7 participants refused the offered silverware during the 3rd intermission. I'm a rational person for context. I deal in traps and poison and evidence-based solutions. This wasn't an infestation. This was something else. "Has anyone been breaking in?" I asked. "Some kind of prank?" "The doors are always locked. The alarm system's been on every night. Nothing's been triggered." She looked at me with this desperate expression. "Please, just look around. Maybe you'll see something we missed." The second room was worse. The scrolls were everywhere, ankle-deep in places, and the smell hit me. Damp paper, mildew, something underneath that I couldn't place. I waded through them, checking the walls, the ceiling, the vents. No holes, no gaps, no way anything could be getting in or out. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just leave? Here's why. Mrs. Donovan was paying me, and I'd dealt with weird hoarder situations before. I figured there was a logical explanation and I just needed to find it. The basement access was behind the 3rd exhibit room, a narrow wooden door, unlocked, opening onto steep concrete steps. Mrs. Donovan didn't follow me down. She just stood at the top and said, "It's worse down there," and then closed the door halfway like she couldn't bear to watch. The smell got stronger as I descended. The basement was unfinished. Bare concrete floor, exposed pipes, storage boxes stacked against the walls, and scrolls. They covered everything, mounded in corners, some still perfectly rolled, others crushed underfoot from previous trips down here. I swept my flashlight across the space. The far corner looked wrong somehow, darker, wetter. I made my way over, scrolls crunching beneath my boots. And that's when I saw it. A small recess in the floor, maybe 2 feet across, like someone had chipped away a section of concrete. It was damp, glistening, and inside, God, even now telling this makes my stomach turn. Inside was a hand, just a hand, bare, adult-sized, pale and clean despite the moisture. And it was moving, not randomly, purposefully. The fingers held a pen. I don't know where it came from. There was just suddenly a pen there, and a small strip of paper, maybe an inch wide. The hand wrote something in that same tiny, meticulous script, then set the pen down, rolled the paper with both. Wait. Both hands? No, one hand. But it moved like it had help, rotating the paper with impossible precision, sealing it with moisture from God knows where, then setting it down on the small pile beside the recess. Then the hand withdrew, pulling back into the concrete like it was submerging into water, and disappeared. 5 seconds of silence. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then the hand emerged again, holding a new strip of paper and the pen, and started writing. I backed away. Slowly at first, then faster, scrolls sliding under my feet. I didn't run until I hit the stairs, and even then I kept my eyes on that corner until I was through the door. Mrs. Donovan was waiting. "Did you find anything?" I couldn't answer right away. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Finally, I managed. "You need to call someone else. I can't help you with this. What did you see?" I don't know how else to explain it, but that's not pests. That's... I stopped. What was I supposed to say? She'd think I was insane. "Please," she said, "tell me." So I did. I told her everything. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, then nodded slowly like I'd just confirmed something she'd been afraid to believe. "We found the first ones 3 weeks ago," she said quietly. "Just a few in the morning when we opened up. We thought it was a prank, but they kept coming. More every day. We swept them up, threw them away, but the next morning there'd be twice as many." "Have you been down there?" I asked. "Have you seen it?" She looked at the basement door. "No, I couldn't bring myself to go all the way in. But I heard something. Paper moving. Wet sounds. I left after that. Didn't charge her. Didn't file a report. What would I even write? I've tried to forget it, but here's the thing. Last week I was doing a job at a house across town, replacing bait stations in a crawl space, and I found one. A single scroll tucked against the foundation. I unrolled it. The exterminator will return when the basement configurations permit observation. My name's not on it, but I know it's about me. I haven't been back to Millbrook. I don't plan to. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that hand. How clean it was. How it never hesitated, never stopped. How many scrolls has it written by now? Tens of thousands? Hundreds of thousands? And I keep wondering if there are others. Other hands, in other basements, writing their endless nonsense into existence. I don't have an answer for that. I just know I check every crawl space twice now, and I don't go near concrete recesses anymore. The museum closed 2 months ago. I looked it up online. No explanation given, just a notice on their website that they'd be shut down indefinitely for renovations. I wonder how deep the scrolls are now. I'm a newspaper delivery driver. Have been for 3 years now. Early 20s, dropped out of community college, needed work that paid cash and didn't ask questions. The route I cover is this agricultural town about 40 minutes outside the city, population maybe 800. I'm out there 6 days a week, 4:30 in the morning, driving the same streets in the dark while everyone's still asleep. It's quiet work, boring mostly. I liked that about it. There's this house on Maple Street, third one from the corner, ranch-style, beige siding, nothing special. For the past year and a half, every single morning I drive past that house, there's a light on in what I assume is the kitchen. Small window, left side of the house, facing the street. Warm yellow glow, always on at exactly 4:47 when I pass. I know because I glanced at my dashboard clock one morning and noticed the time, and after that, I couldn't stop checking every morning, 4:47, same light. I'm a pretty rational person for context. I figured someone in that house just woke up early. Shift worker maybe, insomniac, old person who doesn't sleep well. I never thought much about it beyond that initial curiosity. It was just part of the route, like the broken mailbox on Oak or the dog that always barked from the blue house on Cedar. Then about 6 weeks ago, the light wasn't on. I noticed immediately. That's the weird part. I shouldn't have cared, but the absence of it felt wrong. The house sat there in the dark, and as I slowed down to toss the paper onto the driveway, I looked at that kitchen window. Something moved inside. Not like someone walking past. It pressed itself against the glass. A dark shape, person-sized maybe. But the way it moved wasn't right. It followed the angle of my truck as I drove past, keeping pace with me, head turning to track my movement. I didn't stop. My hands were locked on the steering wheel and I just kept driving, finished the route on autopilot. Told myself it was a curtain or a shadow from a tree or the homeowner looking out for their paper. Except there aren't any trees close to that window, and the movement had been too deliberate. The next morning I thought about skipping that house, genuinely considered it. But I needed this job, and what was I going to tell my supervisor? That I saw something weird in a window? So I went. 4:47, same as always, and the light was back on, but this time I could see inside. The bulb was wrong. It wasn't a normal kitchen light. It was a single bare bulb, high wattage, the kind you'd use in a workshop or basement. It hung from a cord in the center of an otherwise completely empty room. No table, no chairs, no appliances, just white walls and that harsh industrial light casting hard shadows. And standing against the far wall directly across from the window was the shape. It wasn't moving, just standing there, waiting. I stopped the truck in the middle of the street. I don't know why. My foot hit the brake and I sat there staring, and the shape didn't move, and I realized it was watching me back. The proportions were wrong. Too tall, shoulders too narrow, head tilted at an angle that made my stomach turn over. The light was so bright I should have been able to see details, but somehow I couldn't. It was like looking at something through water, blurred and distorted, but I could feel its attention on me. I drove away, threw the paper on the lawn from my window without stopping. Here's the thing, I should have reported it, called the cops, told someone. But what would I say? There's a weird light in someone's house and a person standing in an empty room. That's not illegal. And the more I thought about it during the day, the more it felt like I'd imagined the wrongness of it. People renovate. Maybe they'd emptied the room for painting. Maybe it was just the homeowner and the harsh light made them look strange. But I knew that wasn't right. I kept delivering to that house. I had to. And every morning, same time, the light was on. Same bulb, same empty room. And the shape was always there, always in a slightly different position. Sometimes closer to the window, sometimes pressed against the side wall. Once it was crouched in the corner, and I could see what might have been arms wrapped around its knees, but the proportions still didn't work. The limbs bent wrong. I started timing my route differently, trying to pass the house at 4:45 or 4:50, anything to break the pattern. But my supervisor started getting complaints about late deliveries, so I had to stop. And it didn't matter anyway, because whenever I passed that house, no matter what time I managed to arrive, it was always 4:47 on my dashboard clock. Every single time. I checked my phone. I checked the clock in my truck against my phone before I left the depot. They matched, but when I passed that house, it was always 4:47. 3 weeks ago, I tried to skip the house entirely, just didn't deliver the paper, drove right past. The light was off, and I felt this surge of relief, like maybe whatever it was had ended. Then my truck died. Just cut out, no warning, right there in the middle of the street. Battery was fine when I checked. Plenty of gas. It just wouldn't start. I sat there in the dark for maybe 5 minutes, and I could feel something watching me from that house, even though the windows were black and I couldn't see inside. The truck started on its own. Same moment, the kitchen light clicked on. I delivered the paper. Look, I tried researching the house. County records show it's owned by someone named Howard Clemens, bought in 1987. I drove past during the day last week just to see it in sunlight. The kitchen window faces the street like I knew, but during the day you can't see inside. There's a reflection on the glass. I knocked on the door. No one answered. The mailbox was full, mail dating back weeks. Grass was overgrown, but that light still comes on every morning. Yesterday, the shape was standing directly in front of the window, close enough that I could see it had something like a face, but the features were in the wrong places. Eyes too low, mouth too high, and it raised one arm slowly and pressed its hand against the glass. The fingers were too long, too many joints. I haven't told anyone this part yet. When it pressed its hand to the window, I could see my truck's reflection in the glass behind it. And in that reflection, I wasn't alone in the cab. There was something sitting in the passenger seat, same wrong proportions, head turned toward me. But when I looked, the passenger seat was empty. This morning I passed the house at 4:47. The light was on, the room was empty. No shape against the wall. No figure in the window. Just that bright industrial bulb hanging from its cord in the center of a white, empty room. And the light was swinging, slowly, side to side, like something had just bumped into it. I still have 4 more deliveries on that street after that house. I have to drive past it 6 days a week. The light's going to be on tomorrow morning at 4:47, and I don't know what I'm going to see standing in that room, or what I'm not going to see in my passenger seat. I used to stack shelves at Morrison's Supermart on Route 9. Night shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., usually alone except for Gary, the manager, who'd lock me in and leave around midnight. I'm a pretty rational person, for context. This was just a job to pay for community college. Nothing special about it. The first time it happened, I thought I was losing my mind. I'd spent 40 minutes stocking the canned goods aisle, working left to right like always, checking off items on my scanner as I went. Corn, green beans, tomato sauce, the usual. When I finished, I wheeled my cart to the back to grab more inventory. The store was dead quiet except for the hum of the freezers and the occasional click of the automatic lights sensing my movement. I came back maybe 3 minutes later. There was a can of creamed corn sitting in the middle of the cereal aisle. Aisle 7. I'd just stocked aisle 3. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands. Same brand we carried. Same label. I checked my scanner log. I'd definitely put away the entire corn inventory already. My first thought was that I'd somehow dropped it on my way past, but I hadn't gone through aisle 7. I'd taken my cart straight back through the loading area. I put the can back where it belonged and didn't think much more about it. People do weird things. Maybe Gary had come back for something before I'd seen him leave. 2 nights later, I found a bag of rice in the freezer section. Not the frozen rice we sell. A regular 1-pound bag of dry jasmine rice, just sitting there between the frozen pizzas and the ice cream. The bag was room temperature. I'd stocked the rice that same night, less than an hour before. That's when I started paying attention. Over the next week, it kept happening. A box of crackers in the produce section, nestled between the lettuce heads. A jar of pickles on the top shelf of the pet food aisle. A can of soup inside the dairy cooler, tucked behind the milk. Every single time, these were items I'd personally stocked within the last hour or two, placed in locations that made no sense. I started checking the security office door when I arrived, always locked. I'd watched the monitors before Gary left, empty aisles, just me visible on the grainy feeds. The cameras didn't cover every angle, but they covered enough. I never saw anyone else. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just tell Gary? Here's why. I needed this job. And what was I going to say? Someone's moving products around but not stealing anything? They'd think I was high or trying to cover for my own mistakes. Maybe that I was sleepwalking through my shifts. I started working faster, more carefully. I'd stock an aisle, then immediately walk back through it before moving on. Sometimes I'd find them right away. Items that definitely weren't there 60 seconds ago. A can of tuna in the bread aisle. A bottle of salad dressing in hardware. The misplacements were getting more frequent, more deliberate. I'd catch myself holding my breath while I worked, listening for footsteps that never came. The store felt different after midnight, bigger somehow. The aisles stretched longer in my peripheral vision. I started to notice how many blind spots there were between the shelving units, how many corners I couldn't see around while I worked. One night, I decided to test something. I took a can of beans, pulled it right off the shelf I was stocking. I marked it with a Sharpie, just a small X on the bottom where no customer would see it. Then I put it back, made sure it was nested in with the others, and I went to the break room. Sat there for 10 minutes, watching the second hand crawl around the clock on the wall. When I came back, the marked can was gone from aisle 3. I found it in aisle 9, sitting on top of the sugar bags. My hands wouldn't stay steady after that. I kept working. What else was I going to do? Leave. But I started talking out loud while I stocked, not to anyone, just narrating what I was doing, putting the tomato paste on the shelf now, walking to get more inventory now. Like if I acknowledged my actions, maybe whatever this was would stop. It didn't stop. The night everything changed, I'd been stocking for about 3 hours. It was around 2 a.m. I'd just finished the ethnic foods aisle and was heading back to grab supplies for the baking section when I realized I didn't have my phone. I always kept it in my back pocket, but it wasn't there. I checked the break room. Not there. Checked the loading dock. Nothing. Then I remembered I'd taken my wallet out earlier to grab my insurance card. Gary had asked for a copy for the employee files. I'd left both my wallet and my keys on the break room table when I'd clocked in, planning to put them in my locker. I went to check the locker. Empty. Here's the thing. I didn't panic right away. I was annoyed, confused. I thought maybe I'd moved them and forgotten. But I retraced my steps, checked every surface I'd been near. Nothing. The meat locker is in the back, past the loading area. We keep it at 34 degrees. I had no reason to go in there that night. It wasn't part of my stocking routine, and I didn't have the inventory sheet for it. But I found myself walking toward it anyway. The heavy door was closed, but not sealed. I pulled it open. The cold air hit me immediately, that sharp industrial refrigeration smell mixed with raw meat and plastic wrap. My wallet was sitting on the metal shelf, right at eye level, placed neatly, deliberately, like someone had set it down with care. Next to it were my car keys. I stood there, one hand on the door, cold air pouring out around me. I didn't go inside. I couldn't make myself step through that threshold. The wallet was open, not rifled through. Nothing was missing when I finally worked up the nerve to grab it. Just open, facing outward, so I could see my license photo staring back at me from across the locker. I took my things and I left. Didn't clock out, didn't tell Gary, just walked out through the emergency exit and set off the alarm. Drove home even though my shift wasn't done. Gary called me the next day, asked what happened. I told him I'd gotten sick, had to leave suddenly, couldn't find him to let him know. He said that was fine, but there was something else. Someone had stocked the entire baking aisle after I'd left. He'd checked the logs and my scanner had been used. Showed that all the baking inventory had been processed and put away between 2:30 and 3:15 a.m. My scanner, the one that only registers to my employee ID. I told Gary I must have finished that aisle before I left and forgotten to mention it. He seemed to accept that. I picked up my last paycheck 2 weeks ago, never went back for another shift. Sometimes I think about what Gary said about those scanner logs. I know I didn't stock that aisle, but someone did. Someone who had access to my equipment, my ID, my personal belongings. Someone who knew exactly where I was at all times, who could move through that store without making a sound, without appearing on camera. I still have the wallet. The leather feels different now, like it's been handled by someone else. I need to tell someone about this, and I figure the anonymity here might help me get through it without completely falling apart. I'm Sam Morris, 43, retired Army after 20 years. I'm a pretty rational person, had to be in my line of work. 3 months ago, I moved into my grandmother's house after she passed. It's in Millbrook, the same town where I grew up before my parents moved us to Florida when I was 12. The house needed work, but it was paid off, and after 2 decades of moving from base to base, I wanted something permanent, something quiet. The street, Cordell Avenue, is old. Houses from the 30s and 40s, all similar builds, narrow lots, big windows facing the street. What caught my attention first wasn't anything sinister, it was the curtains. Every single house had these heavy, dark red curtains, same color, same style, thick fabric that hung perfectly straight, covering every window that faced the street. My grandmother's house had them too, though they'd faded to a kind of rust color over the years. I'd been meaning to replace them with something lighter. The thing was, they never moved. Not with wind, not when someone walked past a window inside. I noticed it one afternoon while I was replacing the mailbox post. High winds that day, branches whipping around, loose shingles rattling, but every curtain on the street hung like it was painted on. I stood there with my drill in hand, watching Mrs. Alvarez's house across the street. Her curtains didn't even flutter. I mentioned it to the guy at the hardware store when I went in for weather stripping. He got this odd look on his face, then told me he doesn't deliver to Cordell Avenue anymore. Didn't explain why. Just rang up my purchase and turned to help someone else. 2 weeks later, I met Mr. Peterman. He knocked on my door around 8 in the evening. I'd been watching a game, and when I opened the door, this elderly man, had to be pushing 90, was standing there in a cardigan despite it being late September and still warm out. His expression was stern, almost angry. "You're Helen's grandson," he said. Not a question. I confirmed it, introduced myself properly. He didn't offer his hand. "I live 4 doors down. Your grandmother and I had an understanding about the curtains. I need to make sure you understand it too." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just waited. "Never open those curtains after sundown. Not a crack. Not to look out. Not for any reason." He leaned forward slightly, and I could see his hands were shaking. "Your grandmother knew. Everyone on this street knows. You open those curtains at night, you'll understand why we don't." I asked him what he meant. What would happen? "You'll see what's really out there," he said. "What's always been out there. The curtains aren't for privacy, son. They're for protection." Then he left, walked back down my porch steps and up the sidewalk, disappeared into the darkness between streetlights. I stood there with my hand still on the doorknob, trying to process what he'd said. I checked. Every other house had their curtains drawn tight. No light leaked around the edges. It was like looking at a street full of sealed boxes. Here's the thing. I'm not someone who responds well to unexplained rules. 20 years in the military teaches you to follow orders, sure, but it also teaches you to assess threats rationally. An old man telling me not to open curtains wasn't a threat I could categorize, so 2 nights later I opened them. It was past midnight. I'd been unable to sleep, kept thinking about those curtains and Mr. Peterman's warning. I sat in my grandmother's old recliner in the dark living room, staring at the heavy fabric covering the front window. The house was silent except for the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. I got up, walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside. Just 6 inches, just enough to look out. The street was empty. Nothing moved. The sodium vapor streetlights cast their orange glow on the pavement, and I could see every parked car, every mailbox, every front yard clearly. Nothing unusual. Then I looked at the other houses. Every window that faced the street was illuminated from behind, not bright, but enough to make the curtains glow faintly in the darkness. And behind each curtain, there were shapes, not people. The proportions were wrong. At Mrs. Alvarez's house directly across from me, something tall and angular moved slowly behind her living room curtain. It would have been 8, maybe 9 feet tall if it was standing upright, but it seemed to fold in the middle, bending at an impossible angle. The shadow it cast on the curtain was too dark, too defined, like it was pressed right against the fabric. 2 houses down, behind the Harper's window, something low and wide moved in a smooth, gliding motion from one side to the other. No legs, just a mass that shifted position without the walking motion you'd expect from a person or animal. I counted 4 different windows with movement behind the curtains. Each shape was distinct, each moved in its own particular way, and none of them looked remotely human. My hands were shaking. I stood there holding my grandmother's curtain open, unable to move, unable to look away. Then the shape at Mrs. Alvarez's window stopped moving. It stayed perfectly still for 3, maybe 4 seconds. Then it pressed forward, and I saw the curtain deform as something on the other side pushed against it. Not hands. The bulge in the fabric was too large, too irregular. I let the curtain drop and stepped back from the window. My breath was coming in short, shallow pulls. I backed all the way to the hallway before I could make myself stop moving. Nothing happened. No sound from outside. No knock at the door. I stood in my dark hallway for 20 minutes before I could convince my legs to carry me back to the bedroom. The next morning, I saw Mrs. Alvarez getting her mail. She looked normal, human. She waved at me and I waved back. That afternoon, I walked to Mr. Peterman's house and knocked. He answered, took one look at my face and nodded slowly. "You opened them," he said. I admitted I had. "And now you know why we keep them closed." He started to shut the door, then paused. "Your grandmother lived here 60 years and never opened them at night. Not once. You'd do well to follow her example." I wanted to ask him what they were, where they came from, how long they'd been there, but he closed the door before I could form the questions. That was 6 weeks ago. I keep the curtains closed now. Every night at sunset, I check every window in the house to make sure they're drawn tight. I don't look outside after dark. I've stopped turning on the living room lights in the evening because I don't want them to think I'm awake, watching, aware. 3 nights ago, I heard something outside my bedroom window around 2 in the morning. A soft sound, like fabric dragging across siding. My bedroom's on the 2nd floor. The curtains were closed, but I could see the faint orange glow from the streetlight leaking around the edges. Something moved between the window and the light. The glow dimmed for several seconds as something passed by outside, blocking it. My bedroom's on the second floor. I haven't slept well since then. I keep thinking about what Mr. Peterman said. The curtains aren't for privacy. They're for protection. Protection from what's outside, or protection for what's outside from seeing in. And if everyone else on this street has those things in their houses behind their curtains, then what exactly am I protecting myself from? I found something yesterday while cleaning out my grandmother's attic. A box of old photographs, and beneath them, a handwritten note on yellowed paper. Just one sentence in my grandmother's careful script. The curtains stay closed because we made a promise, and they keep their promises too. I don't know what promise she meant. I need to tell someone about this, and I figure putting it out there might help me understand what the hell happened, or maybe it won't. I don't know anymore. I'm Harvey Jenkins, retired high school history teacher, 62 years old, and before 3 weeks ago I would have told you I was the most boring man in Millbrook. My wife died 4 years back, and since then my routine's been pretty much set in stone. Tuesdays and Fridays I go to the library. Always have. It's a small branch, just one floor, but it's got everything I need. I'd grab a couple books, chat with Linda at the desk, maybe stay an hour or two in the reading area. Normal stuff. The local history section sits in the back corner, past the periodicals. 6 shelves, not much, but I'd been through most of it over the years. Town records, old family genealogies, that sort of thing. I'm not obsessed with local history or anything, but when you teach for 37 years in the same place, you get curious about where you've spent your life. 3 weeks ago, I noticed a new edition. Bright blue spine, looked recently published. Millbrook Mill Operations, 1947 to 1963, by someone named Dr. Patricia Vance. I pulled it off the shelf because my father worked at that mill. Figured there might be something in there about him, or at least about that time period. I knew people who'd worked there. I opened it at the desk by the window. The title page was there. Publisher information, copyright 2024, all normal. Then I turned the page, and it was blank, completely white. I flipped through the whole thing. Every single page was blank. Not like someone had erased text or the ink had faded, just pure white paper, unmarked, like it had never been printed on. I brought it to Linda. She's been the head librarian there for 15 years, probably in her mid-50s, always cheerful. I showed her the book and said, "I think something's wrong with this one. The inside's blank." She looked at the cover, then opened it, flipped through a few pages. Then she closed it and handed it back to me with this odd little smile. "Looks fine to me, Harvey." I just stared at her. "Linda, every page is blank. There's nothing in here. The book's been properly cataloged," she said. Her voice was different, flat. It's exactly what it should be. I don't know why that response bothered me so much, but it did. I went back to the shelf and checked the other new editions. There were 3 more I hadn't noticed before. Millbrook Families, a genealogical survey, Historic Homes of Millbrook County, the Millbrook Observer, selected articles 1982 to 1995. All of them with pristine covers, professional-looking spines. All of them completely blank inside. I brought all 4 books to Linda. These are all blank, too. She didn't even look at them. "Mr. Jenkins, those books are fine. I'd appreciate it if you didn't damage library property by excessive handling." That's when I noticed her hands. They were gripping the edge of the desk, knuckles white. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at something past my shoulder toward the back of the library. "Linda, what's going on?" "I think you should leave the local history section alone," she said quietly. "It's not for circulation anymore." "What do you mean, not for circulation? They're on the shelf. They're there for reference only. Don't check them out. Don't bring them to the desk again." Then she looked directly at me, and I swear to God her eyes were wet. Not like she was crying, but like she was trying not to. "Please, Harvey, just leave it alone." I left with a novel I didn't want and spent the weekend trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Maybe I needed new glasses. Maybe I'd had some kind of episode. I'm not getting any younger, right? But I couldn't shake it. I kept thinking about those blank pages and Linda's face. On Tuesday, I went back. The local history section had a handwritten sign now hanging from the shelf. Reference materials. Do not remove. Linda's handwriting. I checked the books again, still blank. Then I checked the older books, ones I'd looked at before. Millbrook. Through the decades from 1998, blank. Civil War veterans of Millbrook County, blank. Every single book in that section, maybe 40 or 50 volumes, all of them nothing but empty pages between printed covers. Here's the thing. I own books about Millbrook. I've got a small collection at home, things I'd bought over the years or inherited from my father. Old yearbooks, a couple of history texts, newspaper compilation from the bicentennial. Real books with real content. I'd read them, I'd shown them to my students. I went home and pulled out a history of Millbrook, 1823 to 1973, from my bookshelf. I'd bought it at an estate sale maybe 10 years ago. I opened it to a random page, middle of the book, chapter about the Depression era. I could see the text clearly. Then I got a cup of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and started reading the first chapter. I made it maybe 5 pages before I noticed. The words at the top of the page I was on, they looked lighter than they should have. Not faded exactly, but less distinct. I looked back at the previous page. The text there was fine. I looked at the page I was on again, and the lightness had spread, like someone was slowly turning down the contrast. I watched 3 full paragraphs disappear into nothing while I sat there, coffee getting cold in my hand. I flipped back to the beginning. The first 4 pages I'd just read were blank now. Pure white. I closed the book. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I counted to 10, opened it again. 6 pages gone now. I was watching the 7th page fade in real time. Individual words disappearing, letters evaporating from the edges of each word inward, until there was nothing but white paper. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough that when I finally moved again, my coffee was ice cold and the sun had gone down. The book was entirely blank. I checked my other Millbrook books. All blank. The high school yearbook from 1985, my 10th year teaching, blank except for the cover and title page. I should have stopped there. God, I know I should have stopped. But I had to know if anyone else could see it. I had to know if I was losing my mind or if something else was happening. I drove to the library the next morning before it officially opened. Linda's car was in the lot. I knocked on the glass door until she came. When she saw it was me, she froze. "Harvey, we're not open yet." I held up my copy of A History of Millbrook against the glass. It was full yesterday. Text on every page. I watched it disappear. She looked at the book, then at me. Then she unlocked the door and pulled me inside quickly, locking it again behind us. The lights were only half on. The whole place felt wrong, too quiet even for a library. "You need to forget about this," she whispered. "You need to stop looking at those books, stop talking about this, and forget you ever noticed anything. Linda, what's happening? Why is the town's history being erased?" "I don't know." Her voice cracked. "I don't know, Harvey, and I don't want to know. 3 months ago, I noticed it starting. Just one book at first, then more. I tried to tell the town council and they looked at me like I was speaking another language. Literally couldn't understand what I was saying. Then I stopped being able to check out those books in the system. The computer just rejects them. It's spreading, Harvey. It started with the newest books and it's working backward. How long before it reaches the old records? How long before it starts on things that aren't books? I think that's when I really understood how bad this was. Not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. Linda wasn't scared of something. She was scared of knowing something. "What about people's memories?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just looked at me with this expression I can't describe, like she was trying to warn me and apologize at the same time, and my stomach dropped. I asked her when the last time she remembered the mill closing was. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. I can't quite. "March 1979, I said. "There was a whole ceremony. I was there." "If you say so," she said, and I could hear that she meant it. She genuinely couldn't remember anymore. I left. Drove home. I've been sitting in my house for 3 days now trying to figure out what to do. I keep checking books. Not just about Millbrook, any book. They're all fine so far. But I realized yesterday that I can't remember the name of the street the mill was on. I grew up 2 blocks from there. My father walked that route every morning for 20 years. This morning, I tried to write down everything I could remember about Millbrook's history. I got maybe 2 pages before I noticed I was having trouble remembering things I knew I used to know. Names of places, dates of events. They're there, but they're getting harder to grab onto, like trying to remember a dream after you wake up. I don't know if anyone else in town is noticing this. I don't know if I'm the only one who can see it happening, or if I'm just the only one who hasn't forgotten that there's supposed to be something there to remember. I tried calling my daughter in Pittsburgh yesterday to tell her about it, but when I started explaining, the words felt wrong in my mouth, like my brain couldn't quite process what I was trying to say. The library opens in 20 minutes. I don't think I should go back, but I also don't think staying away is going to stop this. Whatever's erasing the town's past, it's already in my house. It's already in my head. I just checked my father's discharge papers from the Army, the ones I keep in my desk drawer. The paper's still there, the official seal's still there. But where his name should be, where his service dates should be, it's starting to fade. I'm a high school teacher. Eric Johnson, 28, boring life, the whole deal. This past summer I was stuck in my hometown for 2 months waiting for my new apartment lease to start across the state. My parents were traveling, so I house sat for them in the same neighborhood I grew up in. Nothing ever happens here. That's what I thought anyway. I've always been a night owl, and with no job to wake up for, I'd gotten into this routine of staying up until 2 or 3 in the morning, watching shows, grading old assignments I'd been putting off. Their house is on a quiet street, the kind where you notice if someone's porch light burns out because it changes the whole block's character. It was mid-July when I first noticed the cars. I'd gone to the kitchen for water, maybe 1 in the morning, and I glanced out the front window like you do. That's when I saw them. A line of identical dark sedans, maybe a dozen, rolling through the intersection at the end of the block. No headlights, completely silent. They moved in this perfect, synchronized way, each one maintaining the exact same distance from the one in front. I stood there with my glass halfway to my mouth, watching them disappear around the corner. The streetlights caught their paint job just enough for me to see they were the same make, same model, same color. Not a convoy you'd see for a funeral or a car dealership delivery. Just identical. The rational part of my brain kicked in. Probably some dealer thing. Maybe a private security company switching shifts. I went back to the couch and forgot about it. But they came back the next night, same time. I checked my phone. It was 1:07 in the morning. Same cars, same route. They came up the block parallel to ours, turned right, looped around the elementary school, and came back past our street before disappearing toward the highway. I started paying attention after that. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just ignore it? Here's the thing. It was summer, I was bored, and it was weird enough to be interesting. I'm a rational person for context. I don't believe in conspiracy theories or paranormal garbage, but this felt like a puzzle, something explainable if I just watched long enough. By the fifth night, I'd timed the whole thing. They appeared at 1:03 in the morning, give or take a minute. The loop took them exactly 11 minutes. 12 vehicles, always the same order, always maintaining formation. I tried to see license plates, but they were too far away, and without headlights, the details just vanished into shadow. I started keeping notes. Not like I was obsessed, just curious. I'd jot down the time, count the cars, see if anything changed. It never did. 12 cars, same loop, dead silent. I couldn't hear their engines even when they were only a block away, and on summer nights with the windows open, you can hear everything. Cicadas, distant highway traffic, the neighbor's air conditioner. But not these cars. They moved like they were gliding. After 2 weeks, I tried to follow them one night. I grabbed my keys, waited for them to pass, and pulled out to catch up. They turned the corner toward the school, and I accelerated to close the gap. The street was empty. Completely empty. I'd been maybe 20 seconds behind them, and they'd just vanished. No side streets they could have taken, no driveways. The elementary school parking lot was gated and locked. I sat there in the middle of the road with my high beams on, staring at nothing. I didn't sleep well after that. The next night, I positioned myself better, sat in my car at the intersection with a clear view of their whole route. When they came through at 1:05, I counted them like always, 12 identical sedans in perfect formation. I watched them complete the loop and head toward the highway exit. I followed at a distance. They took the exit, merged onto the empty highway, and I stayed about a quarter mile back. The highway stretches for 30 miles before the next town, nothing but darkness and farmland on either side. 5 miles out, their taillights started flickering. Not like a turn signal, more like they were phasing in and out. I slowed down, suddenly very aware of how isolated I was. Then they just blinked out. All 12 vehicles disappeared simultaneously, like someone had flipped a switch. I pulled over onto the shoulder and sat there shaking. The highway was empty in both directions. No exits they could have taken, no service roads, just gone. I drove back home doing 90, locked every door, closed every curtain, told myself I was done. No more watching, no more following. Whatever this was, it wasn't my problem, but I couldn't stop myself from looking. The next night at 1:04 in the morning, I was at the window again. There they were, same as always, and the night after that, and after that. 3 nights ago, I decided I was going to call the police. I don't know what I thought they'd do. It's not illegal to drive in circles, but I needed someone else to acknowledge this was happening. I had my phone in my hand, standing at the window, watching the cars complete their loop past our street. I was about to dial when they stopped. All 12 of them, simultaneously, right in front of the house. They didn't brake gradually like normal cars, they just stopped, perfectly aligned, facing our front window, engines idling so quietly I could barely hear them. No headlights, but I could see the silhouettes of drivers in each one, completely still. I stood there frozen with the phone in my hand. My thumb was on the 9, ready to call, but I couldn't move. The air in the house felt thick, like pressure was building. They sat there for 3 minutes. I know because I was staring at my phone screen watching the time tick forward, unable to look away from those dark windshields. I couldn't see faces, just shapes. 12 identical shapes in 12 identical cars. Then the lead car's window rolled down, slowly. The glass sliding down was the loudest sound in the world. Nothing came out, no arm, no head, just darkness inside darkness. And from that open window, I heard my name. Eric. Clear as anything, not shouted, just spoken at normal volume. But I heard it perfectly through the closed window, through the walls. Every car window rolled down in sequence. 12 black openings, 12 empty voids. My phone slipped out of my hand. I didn't hear it hit the floor. Then they drove away. All at once, windows still down, completing their loop like nothing had happened. I watched them disappear around the corner toward the highway, and I stood there until the sun came up, still staring at the empty street. I called my landlord the next day, asked if I could move into the new apartment early, paid extra. I've been here for 2 days now, 70 miles away, different county, different everything. Last night at 1:04 in the morning, I heard a car pull up outside. I didn't look. I had every light in the apartment on, and I didn't look. But I heard my window roll down from the inside. I heard it. The crank turned by itself, and summer air poured in, and I just sat there on the couch with my hands over my ears until morning. I don't know what they want. I don't know what I saw. But I know they followed me here, and tonight it'll be 1:04 again, and I'm going to hear that window, and I don't think I can keep pretending I don't. My name's Mark Hayes. I'm 41. I sell industrial cleaning supplies to factories and warehouses up and down the coast, and until 3 weeks ago, I would have told you the weirdest thing about small towns was how early everything closes. I'm a pretty rational person for context. I deal in bulk orders and shipping manifests. My job is boring on purpose. The car trouble happened outside a town called Clement. Population maybe 800, one stoplight, the kind of place that doesn't show up on GPS unless you zoom in real close. The engine just died. No warning, no grinding, just dead. It was almost 7 at night, already dark, and the only mechanic wouldn't be able to look at it until morning. The woman at the gas station directed me to the Whispering Pines Motel, which she said was the only place to stay unless I wanted to sleep in my car. The motel was exactly what you'd expect. Single story, 12 rooms in an L shape, parking spaces right outside each door. The office had that particular smell motels have, like old carpet and industrial air freshener that's been losing the fight for decades. The kid at the desk couldn't have been more than 19, skinny, with the kind of acne that never really goes away. He checked me in without much conversation, took my credit card, handed me a key with a heavy plastic tag. Room 7. That's when I noticed the corkboard. It was right there on the wall behind him, maybe 3 feet by 4 feet, absolutely covered in index cards and pieces of paper, all pinned up in a dense collage. At first, I thought it was the usual small-town stuff. Babysitting offers, yard work, someone selling a couch. But while the kid was running my card, I started actually reading them. The first one that struck me odd was near the top left. Offered, wedding ring, white gold, size 7. Seeking, 1 mason jar of soil from the Hickory Street property. Must be from the northwest corner. It was handwritten in blue ink, very neat, almost formal. Below that, offered, birth certificate, original, dated 1987, seeking set of 3 rusted keys on a red string, no copies. I must have been staring because the kid said, "Trade board. We don't really do Craigslist out here. People post what they need, what they got." "Right," I said, But I kept reading while he bagged my key. The more I read, the less sense it made. Offered, childhood photograph, black and white, girl on a swing. Seeking, pair of work boots, size 11, must have been worn for at least 5 years. Offered, divorce papers, signed and notarized. Seeking, one handwritten letter unopened, postmarked between 1990 and 1995. There had to be 40 or 50 cards up there. None of them were offering money. None of them were seeking anything that made sense in terms of value. A high school yearbook for a specific wool blanket. A house key for someone's baby teeth. I'm standing there trying to figure out if this is some kind of art project, some weird local tradition, and the kid is looking at me like I'm the strange one for being confused. "Does this actually work?" I asked him. "Do people really trade this stuff?" He shrugged. "Board's been here longer than I have. People take things down when they're done, so I guess so." I took my key and went to my room, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. The specificity bothered me. It wasn't a jar of soil, it was soil from a specific property, a specific corner. It wasn't any set of keys, it was 3 rusted keys on a red string. Someone wasn't just offering a wedding ring, they were offering their wedding ring, the one that fit them, that meant something, and they wanted a jar of dirt. I tried to sleep but couldn't. Around midnight, I went back to the office. The kid was gone, the door was unlocked, and the board was still there. I stood in front of it with my phone flashlight, reading more carefully this time. Here's the thing that made my skin crawl: the emotional weight. Every single card was offering something personal, something that connected to identity, to memory, to relationships, and seeking something equally specific but completely unrelated. A man's military dog tags for a woman's perfume bottle must be half empty, specific brand. A child's report card for a stranger's prescription glasses. Reading them felt like looking at pieces of people's lives being systematically dismantled and redistributed. And then I saw the dates. Some of the cards had dates written in the corner. The oldest one I found was from 11 months ago. That wedding ring card I'd noticed first, 2 weeks old, which meant either no one was taking these offers, or new ones kept appearing to replace the old ones. I took pictures. I don't know why exactly. Proof, I guess, for myself that I wasn't imagining how wrong this felt. Back in my room, I looked through the photos, zooming in on cards I hadn't read carefully before. That's when I noticed the pattern in what people were seeking. They weren't random items. Every single one of them was something that had clearly belonged to someone else, something used and worn and marked by another person's life. The soil from a specific yard, the keys that had opened something important, the letter that had been sealed by someone's hands, never meant for whoever was asking for it now. It felt like, and I know how this sounds, like people were trying to shed one connection to pick up another. Like the trades weren't about the objects at all, but about severing something to make room for something else. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept thinking about that board, about who would give up their wedding ring for dirt, who would trade away their birth certificate for rusted keys. Morning came. I went back to the office around 7 to ask about my car. Different person at the desk this time, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain. I asked about the mechanic. She said he'd call me when he had news, and then I asked about the board. "Oh, that," she said, barely looking up. "Been there forever, part of the town, I suppose." "But what is it for?" She gave me this look, patient but tired, like I was asking about something too obvious to explain. People need things. Other people have things. It works out. But the trades don't make sense. They make sense to the people doing them. I went back to my room. Mechanic called around 10, said it'd be afternoon before the part came in. I had nothing to do but sit in that room and think about the board. I kept pulling up the photos on my phone, reading them over and over, trying to find some logic I was missing. Around noon, I walked back to the office. I told myself I was just checking on my car status, but I went straight to the board. There was a new card, top right corner, white index card with black ink, posted sometime in the last few hours. Offered, Timex watch, silver tone, scratched face, stop function broken, seeking, one-way bus ticket departing Clement, any destination. My watch, the exact watch on my wrist, the one I'd worn for 6 years, the one with the broken stopwatch button I'd never bothered to fix, the scratch across the crystal from when I'd scraped it against a loading dock. My hands wouldn't work right trying to pull out my phone. I took a picture of the card, then another, then looked around the empty office like someone was going to jump out and tell me this was a prank. But there was no one. The woman at the desk was gone. The office was completely silent. I ran back to my room and locked the door. I checked the watch on my wrist like somehow it would be gone, but it was still there, ticking away. I hadn't told anyone in this town anything about myself beyond my name. I'd paid with a credit card, sure, but the watch, that was just on my wrist, unremarkable. Not even a nice watch, just the one I wore because I'd worn it so long I forgot it was there. The mechanic called around 3. Car was ready. I paid, got in, and drove straight out of Clement without stopping. I've got the photos on my phone still. I've looked at them maybe 100 times, trying to convince myself I misread, that it wasn't my exact watch described on that card. But I know what I saw, and here's what I can't stop thinking about. Someone in that town looked at me, looked at my watch, and decided it was what needed to be traded away for me to leave. Not sold, not stolen, traded, severed from me in exchange for my exit. The watch is still on my wrist. I haven't taken it off. I don't know what happens if I do, but I keep thinking about that bus ticket, one way, any destination, and wondering who posted that card. Wondering if I was supposed to make that trade myself. I'm going to be honest. I almost didn't write this down. Part of me thinks if I don't put it into words, maybe I can convince myself I misunderstood what I saw. But I keep coming back to that silence, the way the whole town just went quiet. I'm a park ranger. Nathan Reed, 27, been working the Blackwood State Park for about 4 years now. It's not glamorous work, mostly trail maintenance, picking up litter, occasionally dealing with drunk teenagers who think the woods are a good place to party. I'm pretty rational about most things. I believe in what I can see and touch and explain. That's why what happened last month is still eating at me. We had a bad storm roll through, the kind that drops branches everywhere and turns half the trails into obstacle courses. I was out doing cleanup along the eastern boundary where the park meets the residential area of town. That's when I found it. A rope. Thick manila rope, the kind you'd use for serious rigging work. It was tied between 2 massive oak trees, pulled taut about waist high, running in a perfectly straight line as far as I could see in either direction. I followed it, kept following it. It went on for what had to be hundreds of yards, tree to tree to tree, right along the property line between the park and the back of people's houses. The thing is, I'd patrolled that boundary maybe 100 times. I'd never seen this rope before. I radioed back to the station, asked if anyone knew about a boundary marker or some historical survey line. Nothing. No permits, no records, no explanation. My supervisor told me to document it and remove it if it seemed like a hazard. That's when I started noticing the animals. There was a deer about 30 feet into the park side. It was grazing, moving parallel to the rope, but never crossing it. I watched it get close, maybe 3 feet away, and it just stopped. Turned around, walked the other direction. Not spooked, not scared. Just like there was a wall there. I kept walking the line. Saw a fox do the same thing. Saw birds land on trees on one side, then fly over to trees on the other side but never perch on the rope itself. Never even touch it. Here's the thing that got to me. I could see into people's backyards from where I was standing. There was a woman hanging laundry maybe 40 feet from the rope. She was humming something, moving between her basket and the clothesline, and at one point she dropped a sock. It rolled toward the park, rolled right up to maybe a foot from the rope. She stopped humming, just stood there staring at the sock. Then she turned around and went back into her house, left the sock there. I called out to her, asked if she was okay. She didn't turn around, didn't even flinch, just kept walking. I decided to follow the rope to its end, north first. I walked for maybe 20 minutes before I realized I'd gone in a complete circuit. The rope formed a boundary around the entire residential section of town, maybe 2 miles total. Both ends tied to the same ancient oak tree, the knot so weathered it looked like it had been there for decades. Longer, maybe. The sun was getting low by the time I got back to my truck. I grabbed my gear, including bolt cutters. Look, I know what you're thinking. Why not just leave it alone? But that's not how this works. If something's on state land and it's not authorized, I have to remove it. That's the job. I chose a section between 2 trees about 100 yards from the nearest house. Positioned the cutters on the rope. The manila was old, fibers almost fuzzy with age, but it was still taut, still strong. I cut it. The rope didn't snap back like I expected. Both ends just sort of sagged, still tied to their trees, but now severed in the middle. The cut ends swayed slightly in the breeze. For about 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the silence hit. I don't mean it got quiet. I mean every sound, birds, wind through leaves, distant traffic, everything just stopped. Completely. Like someone had hit a mute button on the entire world. I could hear my own breathing, my heartbeat, but nothing else. Nothing. I looked toward town. There were people visible in their yards now, more than before. Maybe a dozen of them, all standing perfectly still, all facing the park, facing me. Too far away to see their expressions, but close enough to see they weren't moving. Not even shifting weight, just standing. A kid's bike was lying in one yard, front wheel still spinning. But the kid was gone, or standing somewhere. I couldn't tell. The silence lasted maybe 30 seconds, felt like hours. Then sound came back all at once, like someone turning up the volume too fast. Birds, wind, traffic, all of it, but wrong, off tempo, like musicians starting up again after losing their place. The people in the yards turned and walked back into their houses. All of them. Same time, same pace, doors closing one after another like dominoes falling. I got back to my truck, hands shaking so bad I dropped my keys twice. Drove straight to the station, told my supervisor I'd removed an unauthorized rope on the eastern boundary. He nodded, said good work, asked if I noticed anything unusual. I said no. The next morning I went back to file my report. The rope was there again, complete, uncut. Same weathered appearance, same tight line between trees. I checked the spot where I'd severed it. No new knot, no sign of repair. Just continuous rope, like I'd never touched it. I put my hand on the section of rope. It was warm. Not sun warm, body warm. I pulled my hand back. Nobody at the station mentioned it. No work orders to remove it again. I checked the records. No documentation of my report from the day before. Nothing in the log. I haven't gone back to that section of the boundary. Someone else handles those trails now. Nobody's asked why. Nobody's questioned it. But here's what I can't stop thinking about. I drive past the residential area sometimes on my way home. I've seen kids playing in those backyards, dogs running around, normal life. But I've never seen any of them cross that line, never seen them even get close. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder what they're keeping out, or what they're keeping in. I requested a transfer last week. Different park, different district. They asked if there was a problem with my current assignment. I said no. They approved it anyway. Start date is in 2 weeks. I found a real estate listing yesterday. House on the edge of that residential section. Been on the market for 6 months. Price dropped 3 times. The photos show the backyard. You can see the rope in the background of one shot, blurred but visible. The listing agent probably didn't even notice it. The house sold this morning. Family of 4 moving in next month. I don't know their names. I keep thinking I should warn them, but I don't know what I'd say. Don't cut the rope. Don't ask why it's there. Don't notice that your kids will never cross it, and you'll never wonder why. My transfer paperwork came through early. I leave Friday, 3 days from now. I won't miss this place. But sometimes, when it's very quiet, I still hear it. That complete absence of sound, just before everything came back wrong. And I wonder if somewhere in that town they heard it too. I wonder if they hear it every time.